maybe let me talk a little bit about the party. I'll keep the chat open. I'll come back to talk about questions on other things, but let's talk about parties for a second, um, and what this means for like socialist strategy going forward. Because this is something I've thought about a lot and been trying to talk about a lot on this program. Is like, what is a workers' party? Why do socialists even talk about the party so much in the first place? What is a party? So we talked about this a little bit during the post game for patrons last Tuesday, and I said I'd talk about it more today. So first of all, like when we're talking about a party, I think it's really important to recognize that a party is something that is like fundamentally distinct in the socialist context, fundamentally distinct than the way a lot of Americans think of parties. A party in like the American context, frankly, right now it's just two major, private organizations that control ballot access in the United States of America. These being the Republican and the Democratic Party. They control the ballot, right? There's some places that have pushed reforms, places like that don't have, for example, partisan elections. But for the most part, all across this country, particularly on the state level, most states in this country, the Republican and the Democratic Party virtually control access to the ballot. Now, you can petition, you can get enough signatures to get on the ballot as a third party like the Green Party does, but it takes a tremendous amount of manpower and effort to be able to do that in the first place. Time that's not being spent cultivating candidates, building up organizations, etc. Right? You're spending most of your time trying to get enough signatures so that you can get onto the ballot. So that's like the American context of a party, right? But like a socialist party is something that's very, very different. And I think one of the easiest ways to explain it, one of the simplest ways to explain it, is in the same way that you think about the union as the organization of the working class at the shop floor, right? And ideally, we might have a union system that's different than the one we have in the United States. In the United States, unions are balkanized, right? They have certain sections of a worker base, and even in the same institution, in the same facility. In other countries, they have things that are more broad-based, more class-based unions, instead of sort of having them being only represent one section of workers in one particular industry, etc. But anyways, if you can understand that the union is an organization that, yes, it does contract negotiations, but it also organizes those workers. It reflects their interest in endorsing candidates. It can mobilize them to do things like strike for their needs, or also do things like in solidarity with other unions and other parts of the working class, right? So a solidarity strike, sorry, giving financial support from one union to another when they're in hard times or going through a strike, right? This is an organization of class power, right? And there's better versions of it than others, but like fundamentally, that's what it is. What a party is the organization of the what a socialist party would be is the organization of the working class at the level of society, at the level of politics. So, a way to think about this practically is if you had like a workers' party, and like frankly, it doesn't like when people hear the word party, they almost exclusively think at the level of ballot access and running candidates, and that's certainly a part of it. But it's is not the entirety of it, and this is where these things become very, very different from like the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, because an organization of the working class on like a social level, on a political level, can operate in all sorts of ways, right? It can operate practically in the sense of saying, we're going to support workers who go on strike, right? We're going to put manpower into this. We're going to put money into this. We're going to show support for this kind of thing, right? It has that organization and that base to be able to deliver literally bodies, like physically, like we can do this kind of thing if we organize and push ourselves to do it, like showing up at a picket line. It coalesces funds so that you could support candidates, or more importantly workers, for example, if they're going on strike or need things for like a mutual aid or something like that. And lastly, it allows you to be able to make threats and follow through on them, right? So, like one of the big fights right now that we're having in the United States is this fight about, should we vote third party or should we vote Democratic Party? And one of the reason that I get really annoyed with that conversation is not that I think that it's unimportant to think about which way people are voting, but we're talking about it as if we have some kind of orchestrated left. If you had, for example, 10% of the voting population, right? So not enough to win a presidential election. But enough that that's a sizable portion of the population, and people are committed to sort of acting in unison. So if that socialist party said, oh, you know what, they're like, the classic liberal argument is like, hold your nose and vote for the lesser of two evils, right? it doesn't even become a real question to me until you actually have the capacity to say, we will deliver this many people to you, um, as voters, for example, either for or against, right? So either, yes, we'll vote for, the lesser of two evils in this circumstance, but we want this or that, or no, we're not going to participate in this. So we're going to withhold our votes, vote third party, or not vote at all. That becomes, for example, 10% of the electorate. That swings elections. That gives you leverage and power. Um, these people talk about the after effect, right? Oh, well, I'm not going to vote for this person because it's going to mean this, or I'm going to vote for this person because it's going to mean that. And all these things we're talking about as an individual level. And the point of left politics, of socialist politics, is that we have people, we have a message, we have an idea, and we have aspirations that benefit the vast majority of people in this country. Something very different than the Democratic or the Republican Party, right? Which are fractured, largely act in the interest of capital and capitalists. Um, so the one of the fundamental things that we need to be able to do is to be able to develop organizations that can actually coordinate the large mass of people, into acting in unison, instead of what we have now, where there's just a bunch of disparate people making arguments, trying to convince you to do this or trying to convince you to do that, right? That's not a mass organization. It also allows you to do things like build up capacity within the working class movement. I'm a radical, I'm a socialist. I believe that everyday people should be able to run, their own lives, and should be able to organize society. I'm forgetting, um, who this quote is by, British Marxist, radical. Lord, forgive me. But like believe in the radical idea that like a baker, can be, the leader of society, right? Like the idea that like working class people have the capability to govern themselves. But to be able to do that practically, you need to be building up. So I believe that people have that capability, but we have to build up people's capacity, right? Just like on any job that you do, you have to be trained in how to do it, right? To understand the work that you're doing, understand the systems in place, understand the technology that you're utilizing, understand where things can go right, where things can go wrong. You need to be able to build up the capacity, because like let's just say, magic wand thing, we wake up tomorrow and we are running the central bank, right? Now, obviously, in the inclinations and the desires of the people running that central bank, being workers, would be to help out working people. But do we have the knowledge, for example, that would be necessary to be able to operate a system like that? I don't, right? So we also have to, like, one of really important aspect of party building is this education, exploration, and capacity building within our own movement, so that we are prepared to take over these kinds of systems if we are put in charge of them, right? Um, so like the party structure does so much more, for example, than just building a, than just running candidates for office and then winning some elections. It's actually like a training program for governing. Um, this is something that Fred Hampton talks about a lot. I did a video for Jacobin a while ago called like political theory. Political theory is for everybody. Um, and one of the things that I was talking about in that was like how Fred Hampton, radical leader of the Black Panthers in Chicago, um, there's a video we played in that of him getting a proposal from the Black Panthers to start create a public bank, to create a community bank, and he is very angry when he gets this proposal because there is no political education aspect to it, right? There is no public outreach, internal outreach within it to say to the membership of the Black Panthers, for example, this is what a community bank does. This is why it's important. This is how it functions, so that you understand what you're doing and not just doing what you were told. And he talks about how this is important because, why do you have a community bank in the first place? Well, the financial system has largely cut out Black people, from being able to get finance or loans to be able to purchase things in their community, which means that they're underinvested in, which means that they don't have the capacity to buy a house, to buy a car, to buy furniture. And if they are able to get access to this funding, it usually means that they're going to be paying usury interest rates on that and be taking advantage. So taking that power away from finance, delivering it to the people is a positive thing. But if you don't have this kind of understanding of it, then I don't know, why not skim a little bit off the top, right? You're acting as an individual. If you don't see this thing as a vehicle, for example, of empowerment of working people, the the tendency, the human nature aspect of maybe saying like, you know what, I could maybe take some money from this, if I have the ability, right? If I'm in a certain position, and Fred Hampton gives examples about how radical left movements all across the globe have fallen into these crises, where they take power and then people start being corrupt. Um, so you have to build up that kind of revolutionary consciousness and understanding, not just to know who your enemies are and who your friends are, but also to understand the techniques and the tactics that are being put forward. That's called political education, and that is a fundamental aspect of party building. Um, so the party, like when we talk about the working class movement, we're talking about a pre-party moment in American history. We do not have that kind of institutional organization. There are groups and institutions that maybe would like to become that organization, but they're not there yet. And I'm not going to sit here and say which ones, um, I think could necessarily deliver us, because the proof is sort of in the pudding. What things are going to be able to bring in the membership? What organizations are going to be able to bring in the people? But understanding what it is that we're missing right now is that kind of party formation. Understanding what that party formation would be doing in a moment like this is something that's really important. So people are always like, "Oh, the left is this, or the left does that, or the left failed at this, or the left is unsuccessful at that." And it's like, yeah, it's true, right? Like I think the left failed, for example, during the railroad strike. I think we should have been a lot stronger. We should have been able to drive that public conversation more. And certainly our elected representatives should not have voted to break the railroad strike. But without a party apparatus, I mean, we're just hoping that we can maybe coalesce some level of coordination between a large and disparate mass of people. I'm just talking about like the left, people who self-identify as leftists right now. You're not going to be able to do that if you don't have an institution or organization that is going to be doing that kind of that kind of coordination. We also don't have a place where we can have these debates, right? You know, all sorts of ideas that were like, oh, this is a left-wing idea. I mean, where's the debate held, right? It's held interpersonally amongst friends. Largely, it's held online. Some publications put out arguments. You should think about this in this way, or you should think about this in that way. A party would be the forum to be able to do that, so that we can debate these things. But once we decide on something, we all unite behind it. These are basic tenets of like successful socialist parties the globe over, and that's something that we're missing right now. And I'd like to keep going on this if people are interested in it. Yeah, CLR James, thanks, Strom, is who I was trying to quote a second ago. Um, I want to keep going on this, but instead of me just going off the top of my head, let's see if people have questions or points or anything that they want to add into this conversation. So, I can be speaking with y'all instead of to you. All right, I'm keeping my eye on the chat, so throw anything in there. I mean, also, Michael says, there have been ballot initiatives to add ranked choice voting at city and municipal levels, but that doesn't work in a primary. Technically, the political parties are private entities. Yeah, totally. I mean, the primary is one thing. Two, I think that like we should. I don't think that it's wrong to sort of push for some electoral reform, but I think that like you can have all sorts of electoral systems in like we could have a parliamentary system, which I think would be a better system than the one that we have right now in the U.S. Um, but there are countries that have parliamentary systems, and that doesn't deliver you where you need to be. Right? There's and I think it's because a lot of the left is like comes more out of like the progressive movement than the socialist movement. Um, you know, whatever the conditions of the electoral system are, um, like you could have like the greatest and most progressive electoral system, and that is in no way, shape, or form a kind of guarantee that like the governments that are going to be elected are going to be more pro working class or working class rooted than they are today, right? So I don't think that it's wrong to advocate for these things strategically where you can, but there's this kind of if we just fix the American electoral system, we would have a more radical government. Now, capital and capitalists are very capable of reorienting themselves to new rules of the game if that gets set up in that way. Okay. Well, I'm not. DV, if you could reframe this, DV says, why do so many leftists in the US fail to understand the danger of commodification regarding public services? I mean, are you talking about like the privatization efforts, to sort of target public utilities, or are you talking about, um, if you could reformulate that, would that help me out to answer that? Rob says this too. Yes, the official left parties in Western countries draw their candidates from a hopelessly narrow pool of people. They're trying not to select working people you suspect. I mean, I think that there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, like, look, the Labor Party is a great example of something that used to on some level ostensibly be a working party, but has been completely captured. Um, but I mean, like, I was listening to a Leo Panish conversation on mandatory deselection in the Labor Party, and just to sort of catch people up, what that would mean is people who are Labor Party members who get put up for elections, deselecting those who are sort of out of line with the party. Right? Remember, the Labor Party was completely incapable was completely hostile to the Corbyn project, right? So the argument, I supported deselection because I think you should get those people out of the party because they're weakening the Labour Party, they weaken the Corbyn movement. And in fact, as we know now, there were members who were actively sabotaging the Labour Party to make sure that the Tories stayed in power and Jeremy Corbyn did not become the prime minister. But a point that Leo Panich makes about this that I think is an interesting and I think a good one is the idea that, like, if you just consistently shuffle around um, these kind of characters, you're going to get the same kinds of people. Because if you think, for example, um, people who get into these kind of positions and then start to betray some of the fundamental commitments of the organization or the party that they're in, you have to understand that problem structurally, right? Because the argument can't just be that, oh, these people sort of lost sight personally, right? Their heart wasn't in it, and they became corrupt or they started betraying their base. No, there's something structural within the Labor Party and structural within governing that probably amplifies those people in the party, certainly, but also will pull certain people in a more conservative bend. Let's call it that. So, how can you change that? Well, you have to be doing mass political education within the organization and the institution so that the membership, the people in the membership, are prepared to maybe be in a leadership position and then not to fall into the same traps that the people before them fell into. This is, I think, some of the most critical work that we have in front of us, and it's hard because it's such an advanced level of political strategy and political thinking, right? Because we're so far out of power, we rarely think about what it would be like if we were in power. But that work has to start right now, right? That, like, like real work, like, what would a democratized financial system look like? What are the steps that would be necessary to be creating that? Like, doing that kind of political education with membership right now so that everyone in the organization understands these things is really crucial, so that when we do have momentum behind us and we're just going to have the ability to maybe enact some policies, we don't start tripping up over ourselves. This is very difficult work that takes a while to sort of, because think about it, you're enculturated under capitalism and under the kind of current conditions. To be able to deliver, to be a transitionary movement between this system and a more egalitarian one, there's going to be a lot of things that come up along the way. And you have to have that kind of social education within the organization so that we understand. Because people say, I'm a socialist. And a lot of times it's like, well, what does that mean? For most people, it means they have a commitment to working people over bosses, and they want working people to be empowered, and that is good. That is the start of it. But really thinking about, what would a financial system look like under a different model? What would a labor system look like under a different model? Like, we have to be building up that capacity and understanding and investigating those questions ourselves, so that when we do have the ability, even if we're not in the majority, but we just have some ability to sort of deliver things on some level, on the political level, we can start laying the groundwork